Hello and welcome to episode 184 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are mostly going to cover legacy talk, something we've been discussing for a few weeks now, teasing on the last few episodes. But we want to talk about who has the most to gain and who has the most to lose at the 2025 CDL Championship, which is coming up next week. And we will also talk about some other stuff that is champs or COD sports related throughout the show. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Doing all right, like you said. I'm pretty excited about this one. I think we both are. Um, got some decent stuff to talk about. I feel like so. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. Might as well jump right in.
Yeah, so let's talk about the other stuff, the peripheral stuff. This was something that I saw yesterday, I believe it was, and there was the conversation. If you're on Twitter, if you're on COD Twitter specifically, you probably saw this as well. But the conversation was around the promotion or lack thereof of champs by Activision or the CDL in general, which I thought, I thought to myself, but again, like I'm not going to put it out there and say why isn't the CDL promoting champs because it's like the end of the season. I just kind of think that's how it's been for the last few years, so I'm not really too bothered by it. I've come to accept that and to expect it. But I think Ben Nissim, his tweet was the one that kind of kickstarted it off. He said, "We are about 9 days from champs, and there has been virtually no marketing push from the league to promote the event. Happened last year too, and they got bailed out because Optic both ran a great event plus made a deep run." He followed up by saying the league in 6 years has yet to effectively maximize its marketing potential during both preseason and postseason windows. Plenty of things they can do that don't require a lot of money. Need a full-on rethink for next season. And I think I saw another tweet where he said like they obviously care about the CDL or something like that. And I believe it was Bance that fired back and said they obviously do not care about the CDL. But I want to get your thoughts on this, Bink, because this and some other things related to the advertising and the promotion of the league has been something we've talked about for a while now, and that it feels like the stepchild that has been kind of ignored by Activision and now Microsoft. What do you think about the promotion or lack thereof of CDL Champs 2025?
Yeah, I mean that's been something we've talked about. Really, I mean there have been multiple decent sized breaks. I would say over the 5ish years of the CDL era, and I feel like that's kind of just been something that's happened and never truly been addressed over all these years. It's just like, you know, if you follow the CDL closely, you know that there's a break going on and you have an idea of when stuff is going to happen again. But if you're just a more casual fan and you don't like really know what's going on, then there's a chance that you might fly under the radar and you miss something. And that's one of my friends, Rule. Shout out Rule message last night, and he was like, yeah, I just I didn't even, I had to check to see if champs had already happened because I didn't know what was going on. And um I feel like that's a sentiment that again, like people like you and me and other uh people who follow the CDL very closely are like, yeah, it's just par for the course at this point. But for other people, it's like, they could think the season's just done and dusted and there's nothing going on. So, definitely an issue, especially when it's champs we're talking about, right? Like if this happens, like, they do their yearly break for the winter holidays, and that's during the online matches. That is what it is. There's no real way to avoid that, in my opinion. Even if like we've talked about it before with like doing the season earlier, even if they did it in November, they would inevitably take some form of a break for the holidays. That just makes sense. So, um, but when we're talking about champs, like that's the marquee event on the calendar, and that's like it's your Super Bowl, your World Series, your NBA Finals, however you want to phrase it or compare it to other sports like that. That's what you're that's the big deal, and that's what we're doing this for, right? So, definitely a kind of puzzling, in situation here where like you have this time and space to do whatever you really want to do in terms of marketing and um, the seemingly the choice right now is just like, they aren't doing anything. And I can definitely see why that would be frustrating. I feel like it'd be more frustrating to um, the teams themselves or the people, actually competing and owning a spot in the league and whatnot, because that's where it would affect them in terms of like advertising and getting fans, the viewership, getting people excited for the tournament and whatnot. But yeah, definitely a bit of a head scratcher.
So I found the comment that I had seen on Twitter. Someone said in response to Ben, because they don't care. And Ben responded, said, see the stupid ass comment too often. If they didn't care, we wouldn't have a league and they wouldn't fund a single esport competition with their IP. Clearly, they care enough to invest millions each season to make this happen. Could they do a better job? Yeah. And then Bance replied to that, said, you're an idiot if you can sit there and say they care. They do the bare minimum to make it a tax write off of being a marketing tool for their game. That's all it is. And then he responded to another Ben tweet, said, I don't think he was saying a tax write-off. I don't think it was to begin with, but definitely over the years, it's become one. They've fully given up and just now gave the bare minimum to keep it going, which I think is undoubtedly true. I would look at you sideways if you tried to argue that they have not, completely stripped it down to, pretty much the basic parts and have done very little to try to build it back up. Obviously, we're in quote unquote the esports winter and all that. And so I get that there is a financial element at play. But I've also made this point numerous times on the show, and not just in relation to the CDL specifically, but these are some really, really rich and powerful people that are involved in the CDL, or that kind of fund the CDL. If they want to make this a success and they want it to be a big deal, then they will spend the money because they already have that. Sometimes it's not about making money in the short term, it's about making money in the long term, and neglecting the CDL in the way that I can't even say it's like leadership, because it's not the guys that are running the league ops, right? It's not those people that I have a problem with. It's the higher ups in Activision and Microsoft, that they do not care about this thing. Like they could use it as a marketing tool much more effectively, and we've talked about it before. You could base reveals around this league. You can base seasons around this to hopefully show off and showcase what you have in your game every single year, but they don't do that. So I don't really understand I don't understand their marketing strategy, if there even is one, or if it's just we think this could be valuable at some point. We think esports could be valuable again at some point. So let's just keep it alive as long as we can without really putting all that much effort or all that much money into it. I just I don't know what the solution is. Like, the old saying is, to make money, you got to spend money, basically. And they don't spend the money. So it's on a grander scale, kind of what we saw with the Paris Legion and the Vegas Legion, where, yeah, you can just be there for the ride and to hopefully get your money back or something. But to be like one of the big orgs, to kind of have the success that I'm sure a lot of these organizations would envision, you have to spend the money and you have to take the risk. And I don't think the CDL is willing to do that. We saw it with the Overwatch League. Like they just let it die. They just said, let's pull our money out and something else can start in its place. I would not be surprised if something similar happened with the CDL. Obviously, we got that statement put out, what was that, after last season, where they basically said there's a commitment for whatever it was, 2 years, 3 years, and they laid out some ground rules for what they're looking to do over those next 2 to 3 years. I have not seen really any change in the CDL this season from previous seasons, and you can correct me if you believe that I'm wrong about that. Obviously, the format has altered a little bit with the minor coming into play, which I think is something that should happen. I think there should be more event-based games and matches, because that's probably if you are going to bring in an audience on a consistent basis. I don't know if a regular season game is really going to do it. You probably do need tournaments and something with stakes. So a minor or multiple minors could help that. But yeah, I have a hard time believing that the way that the CDL is operating right now is anything but just doing the bare minimum and hoping that it doesn't really affect the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, sort of, unless you got more on that too, sort of as a segue, I think just as a interesting conversation, the Toronto Ultra are seemingly hosting some sort of $10,000 tournament this weekend. Um, the only promotional material that I saw was the tweet, and then Breaking Point tweeted it, and it says 3 CDL teams, 13 challengers teams. So I'm not entirely sure who the CDL teams are. My guess is that it would be 3 of the 4 teams that aren't at champs, because as we've known historically, like, you know, the CDL doesn't like the whole off-season full CDL team tournaments. They allow those tournaments where it's like half of your team playing with another half of the CDL team or whatever. That's another entire conversation there. But, you know, as a segue, like, this is something that could have been, you know, again, if they're not allowing full CDL rosters at champs, I don't know how it would have been possible over this break. But, like, you know, something like this happening last week or even the week before as sort of like a tune-up, especially with the position some of these teams are in. You know, a team like Vancouver jumps to mind, who we've talked about over these weeks, have those 2 grand finals appearances and then come in last at Major 4. That's the last time we've gotten to see them. So, you know, even avid fans like ourselves don't really truly know what kind of form they're coming into champs in. A tournament like this, although, you know, again, like you're saying, like, you know, might be lower stakes, might, you know, the amount of passion, for lack of a better term, or how hard some of these teams are going, that would always be debated. But inevitably it would have given an opportunity for, like, the Vancouver team to be like, okay, we can showcase what we're capable of again. Or it would have just been another opportunity for us to see them in action, and if they struggle, it's like, okay, maybe we have to be a little more concerned about Vancouver heading into champs, as opposed to the position we're in now, just being completely blind to what Vancouver is going to look like at champs. I know that's just one example, and this tournament is, you know, it's a good thing it's happening. But that really got me thinking about some of these other things they could have been, the league could be doing in this time to try and set the stage for champs. I mean, even, again, not a great example, but, you know, something that always pops up and when people are talking about, like, filling the gap and whatnot, is, like, you know, World Series of Warzone stuff. And obviously when Scump won that, like, the whatever,
The
I think it
YOLO thing.
was, yeah. um I don't remember when that happened, but, like, that's another, like, they could do something similar to like that, where it's just during this time we get the 32 players that are playing in champs into one Warzone lobby, who's, you know, who can do the best. I mean, even they would never do it to promote another game, obviously, but, like, if we got those players to, you know, play Fortnite or something, like, you know, at least get the players together. That's not a really good example because that doesn't help. But I know I saw tweets of it feels like a lot of people, and I know Zuma and Scrap and Hydra and Dashy, they've been playing Counter-Strike a little bit on stream over the recent weeks. I even saw, like, I think it was Scrap and Dashy did a chess chow. I saw a Breaking Point tweet of. So it's like, you know, there's been this gap to fill in this break period, and it's just not being taken advantage of. And I do think, you know, for what it's worth, this Toronto Ultra thing is cool. I don't know all the details and everything. Will be interesting to see which 3 CDL teams are actually playing along with what the challengers teams are. But end of the day, like, that has been something we've talked about. Even, you know, even if they did want to do tournaments, some sort of tournaments, like even an S&D tournament on a Friday night, like last week, to try and, like, you know, build a little momentum. There's been that, like, unwritten rule of, like, no full CDL teams can compete together in non-CDL events or whatever. That would seemingly be an issue and really it's a double-edged sword because like we're talking about like the Toronto Ultra in this case, like Kason and in the offseason and stuff. There are people who want to seemingly help the CDL promote its game and its league, and then these unwritten rules that we hear about but are never actually confirmed, like they get in the league's own way. So it's a bit of a conundrum, that's for sure.
Shout out Ismail in the YouTube chat. He said, I got a feeling Optic is going to surprise a lot of people, and we will definitely be talking about Optic a little bit later on when we get to Legacy talk. The three teams that are competing, just according to like who they tagged in the photo, is LAG, Vegas, and Minnesota. So yeah, three of the four teams that did not make champs, C9 being the notable exception as the only team not to go to champs and not to play in this tournament. So yeah, it's like they should have. I don't know what the logistics are or anything. Maybe they were waiting for confirmation from one or more teams about like whether they were actually going to participate. But announcing something 3 days before the start of a tournament is not great. Even if it is just a small tournament, like it's not like an official thing. It's just kind of their own separate event. Or online event, but yeah, it's not great. I would also say, just in general, and we've talked about this, and I suggested it before. Why is the CDL not organizing S&D events? Why is the CDL not organizing hardpoint, eights almost? Why are they not taking initiative to bring together these players outside of official matches and spotlight not only their talent, but their personalities? This is something that every other professional sports league in the entire world has figured out it is very good to have entertaining personalities within your league that people kind of gravitate to, that they end up watching the matches that they're involved in because they have this affinity for them. And yes, there is a certain level of that with Optic in particular, and to a lesser extent LAT and FaZe and maybe a few other individual players. But tell me what you know about Gwen. Tell me what you know about Snoopy. Tell me what you know about name insert player that hasn't been around for 5 years. What do we know about them? We don't know much because the CDL has done basically no like day in the life or docu style content about these players, at least recently, and shown you this is Snoopy's backstory. This is why you should root for him. This is why he is so good. Tell me about last season and how bad it was, and then how great this season has been in comparison. None of that has happened at the CDL level. Maybe individual teams have done similar things, but to put the onus on the teams themselves, when you know that many of them, I don't want to say all of them, but many of them have kind of followed suit with the CDL and have said, hey, we're not going to put as much effort, as many resources. We're going to scale back our content team. Sometimes even the esports competition side of it, we're not going to have as many coaches or analysts. And so they've dialed it back. It just leads to this happening where Champs is, a week away now, basically. And there has been little to no promotion about it. I haven't seen a YouTube ad. I haven't seen anything of the sorts. Of course, like on Twitter, you might see the CDL tweet, hey, Champs is in 9 days, here's the schedule or whatever. But even the CDL Twitter can't get hyped up about the biggest event of the season happening. And that's unfathomable for what we know about professional sports. The NBA has gotten into hot water very recently and is still in hot water from its fan base and some media members because they believe that the NBA hasn't been promoting the finals and making it as important or seem as important as it really is and giving it the pomp and circumstance and the respect that it probably deserves. The CDL is obviously on a much, much smaller scale. It's dwarfed by the NBA or the NFL, but they should be learning from these professional sports leagues and the mistakes that they're making or they have made in the past, and say, hey, like they had 60 years, 70 years to learn from this, and now we're gonna do something creative and smart with our marketing, and that just hasn't come to pass. And I'm completely baffled as to why that is, other than it's just not an important thing to care about in the CDL or in Activision and Microsoft. So I don't know if you had any other thoughts on this topic, because it is something that I think we both could probably rant on for a long, long time.
Yeah, I mean, you really you brought up a good point with the docuseries stuff. That used to be cool, and not even, I mean, obviously it's a little different for you and me when we used to write about these guys. But I mean, there was a time where like apathy, I could, Brian, I don't know how to say his last name, Zelyakov or whatever. I used to be able to spell that without even looking it up. It's a long last name. It's got some, obviously starts with a Z, and so it's a weird one. I couldn't do it now, but 2018, 2017 Bink could spell that without even having to double check it. And now, like you mentioned, Gwen, rookie of the year last year. I know his first name's Isaiah. That's it. I don't even know where he's from. I think he might be from like Indiana or somewhere in the Midwest, potentially. Clue. But what'd you say?
I said no clue. I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea
anything about him, really.
And I know the Snoopy story. I'm pretty sure he was like discovered. I say that lightly. I'm pretty sure Censor obviously was one of the guys who like gave him his first chance, obviously last year. And I think the year before, at the end of that year, because that's when he like played at Champs, would have been 2 years ago. I think Censor started playing with him in like Challengers or whatever. And I believe he's from Mexico, or of Mexican descent, I believe. And that's like all I know about Snoopy too. And it's like, you bring up a good point there, and just that lack of material. Obviously, you really like Snoopy, so to a lesser degree, but Gwen is a prime, like literally rookie of the year last year, and neither of us can tell you his last name or where he's from. I think that speaks enough in itself to lack of promotion of the players, and in turn lack of marketing and advertising for the league and Champs overall.
I could be wrong. I think Gwen's last name might be Gwen. That might be it, but I am not. I'm looking it up just to. Yeah, it is Gwen. So like,
okay.
So but again, like I remember when I was coming up in Call of Duty, and obviously you've been around Call of Duty longer than me, and you know players or know about players that I don't really remember or I vaguely have knowledge of. But the players that were in Black Ops 2 and Ghosts, I could, rattle off like the first and last names of these players a lot of times. And I knew, for example, Scump was from Pennsylvania, and that he was in high school. And like, I remember watching those videos of him and like how he went back home and then he came to the Optic House. Obviously, like those are extreme examples because Optic is the biggest team. Scump, at least when Nadeshot was playing, Scump was the second biggest or second most popular player, and then eventually became the most popular player when Nadeshot retired. So like those are extreme examples, but I knew that Slasher went to college for, I think, like computer engineering or robotics or something like that in California. I knew a lot of the fun facts about these players and kind of like their general upbringing, even if it wasn't as detailed, because we had those videos. We had these kind of introspective pieces about who this player was and what makes them tick. And I know like we're probably getting super granular and super bogged down, and people will say, well, it's just an esports, just people playing video games. We're like, every sport is just people playing a child's game. Like that's literally all it is. And it's just, people throwing a ball around, kicking a ball around, people shooting a ball into a net. Like it's all kind of silly when you get down to it. But if you don't take it seriously, or if the people running the leagues, they don't take it seriously, they don't care enough about it, then why should anybody else? Why should people pay their hard-earned money to go to an event, for example, go to Champs in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada, and spend their money on a ticket, spend money on concessions, spend money to buy a jersey, spend money to do anything at these events? Why should people even tune into a free live stream if they don't care about it? And the CDL has to do a better job. They likely won't, because I've said this, and everybody basically has said this, that they should be doing better. And we've been saying that for several years now, and they haven't done any better. In fact, they've probably gotten a lot worse, and kind of ignored the CDL even more. I mean, the fact that we don't even have a pause feature, we don't have these kind of fixed tools. We've had broken Codcaster for the entire season. Like, that shows that even at a developer's level, this is not a priority, and it's likely not going to change overnight. It's probably not going to change at all in general. So I don't know whether we should get used to that, whether people should band together to change that, if there is any way to change that. But that's kind of where we are right now with the state of Call of Duty. And I think the sad part about it is, and this will be my last point, is that once the games start, it's all fun again. And Champs will come around and we'll be talking about it. We'll be raving about it. Like, oh my God, can't you believe this happened? This was an incredible match. These are incredible moments. And it's just a shame that not as many people are watching as they should be. Not as many people care as much as they should, or could, if the proper care and the proper time was taken to promote this effectively. And but that's where we are right now with Call of Duty esports. Last thing, I think we'll skip over the attached Zuma thing. I didn't really have anything. I don't know if you had any thoughts on this, but like, obviously attached Zuma said they nearly teamed with Kenny in accuracy in World War II. I don't know if you had any specific thoughts on that one.
I just thought that was kind of crazy that would have been, especially if it happened, it would have completely altered the course of that season, because they said it was after the stage 1 playoffs, which I believe is the event phase 1, when Attach ran through the artillery and they upset Optic and whatever. And obviously that led to Optic roster changes, and it didn't lead to this roster change, but other roster change happened. TK, Team Caliber, which is where Kenny and Accuracy were on, they ended up winning another event, made it to the finals of Champs with Enable and Pharaoh, RIP F3. The FaZe team didn't really change, but they were pretty strong contenders for the rest of the season. So that was just something that came up on the timeline. I saw it. I was like, damn, that would have been interesting to see, because that would have been a scary team, especially Kenny and Zuma on the SMG together. That would have been an interesting one.
And then the next one was about aBeZy, and I think this kind of goes into the legacy talk, because aBeZy is one of the greatest Call of Duty players in esports history. Like there's no doubt about that. Where you rank him is kind of irrelevant, but he is a 2-time world champion. He's been pretty dominant. He was an MVP candidate for a few seasons. He's been very valuable to the most consistent team in the CDL's history. But he said that he doesn't want to retire until he's 30, which is, kind of an insane comment just in general when you think about professional sports. But esports, this is like, he is like I guess in esports, or in COD esports more specifically, 30 is like 40 in the NBA. Like, there are a few players that make it to 40 in the NBA, but there's not that many. And 30 is kind of that in COD. We saw Clayster, I think he was 31 when he retired. I think Crim6 might have been 30. We just saw Attach retire. He was in his late 20s. We look at Slasher like the old man in the league, and he is 28, 29. So 30 is kind of like, the age where it seems it's not like a physical thing or like a motor skills thing. I think it's just life gets in the way and players prioritize different things once they get older, once they start getting married, start having children. And I think that's really what it comes down to. But aBeZy is 25 right now. So he would turn 30 in 2029. So you get 4 or 5 more seasons. What do you think about in general this early retirement age that we've seen? It's not only COD Esports, but because I don't know who the oldest like top level pro is in esports. You would probably know better than me with League of Legends specifically, but I think it's a young man's game in general. So what do you think?
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. And Slasher turns 31 on September 2nd this
Okay.
year. So he's like he's definitely the oldest player actively competing right now. And I believe I saw earlier this year that aBeZy was either I think they said one of the stats Twitter said aBeZy is the second oldest SMG entering this year, and I believe TJ was the oldest. Um, so yeah, I think that's really just what we've seen over the years. I mean, even guys that you mentioned like Clay and Krim and stuff, they could still be competing if they wanted to. But really, it's just as these players get older, their priorities in life change, and they start wanting to potentially start dating, get married, have kids, have a house, et cetera, et cetera. And the biggest thing with that is as they get older, they see it's not the same. I think I saw maybe Gunless tweeted something about it not too long ago. It's like, when you're younger, like especially when Call of Duty was in its prime, like, there were days where you just wanted to play COD for 8, 10, 12 hours a day and not get out of your chair and just sit there and grind and hang out with the boys and whatnot. But as you get older, your willingness to want to do that sort of changes, and
Yeah.
your life gets in the way, your priorities change, however you want to phrase it. So I do think that's the biggest thing. And I mean, someone like aBeZy, with his, as good as he is, he could play really as long as he wants, in my opinion. I do think his play style could in theory affect his I don't even want to say it because I don't want to put any bad juju on him or anything, but we've seen like hand injuries and stuff over the years with Zuma, and that, like, someone like aBeZy could in theory deal with that just because of how crazy and stuff his movement is on the map. But at the same time, I know a lot of the guys nowadays, and even the phase guys, they do like the hand stretches and they take good care of themselves. So not even put that out there, but it goes to say it is just something kind of crazy to think about, because it feels like just yesterday to me we're talking about aBeZy as this up and coming kid, the tiny terrors, him and Simp, and now we're looking at Simp's a little younger, but like, we're just a couple more retirements away from like the quote unquote old kids that are vets in the league being Dashy, Simp, aBeZy, these guys who were not too long ago like the fresh faces in the league, and that's the way of the road, but definitely a weird one to think about in my opinion.
Uh, It's really hard because esports, it's so different from traditional sports on a lot of different ways, but the reason that players retire is completely different in esports and traditional sports. Like there are physical injuries that
Yeah,
are suffered in esports. Zuma is a great example because he could have continued to play and he likely would have for at least a few more years, but he obviously had what was a thumb injury that he couldn't really push through. He thought like maybe he could do like keyboard and mouse or something like that, but in the end it is physically demanding on players' hands. But the biggest thing that has led to these, I would say, premature retirements is the burnout that these players suffer. Scump probably is the best example of this because Scump, I think, better than anybody else, like any of like the goats or the top 10 players of all time, I think like maybe Formal could be up there as well, but like Scump aged really, really well in that his game did not fall off to a degree that we saw with other players that tried to stick around maybe a little bit too long. And maybe it would have. Maybe Scump wouldn't have been as good when he's 29, 30, 31 years old. But at the same point, like, he had this super high, consistent level of play for basically 12 years or so. But even he couldn't even get through the last season. You know, he said he's going to retire at the end of the 2023 season. He gets 2 months in and he retires. And he was in tears, like not only because he's retiring, but I think, and maybe I'm speaking out of school here, but like it seemed like I just can't take this anymore. I cannot put my mind through this. It's not about my body. It's I cannot mentally get through another Call of Duty game, another CDL season. Like, this is ridiculous. And that is not something that we see a lot of times. We've seen it a little bit, but not very much with players in the NFL or the NBA where they get through a few months and they're like, yeah, I'm just done. Usually you see that with players that have kind of, you know, they're nearing the end. They're at their 40-year-old, birthday or something. And they're like, all right, like I don't want to be away from my family anymore. I don't want to put my body through this. But a lot of times they still have the passion to actually play the game. They just don't want to put themselves physically through what they have to. And in Call of Duty, it's the mental aspect of it. Like, they just don't want to mentally have to do it all over again. And I think part of that is roster changes at the end of the season, how drastic these rosters can really alter themselves in a single summer or a single winter or whatever, because that doesn't happen in football all that often. Like, you're still going to have most of the same teammates year to year in football. In basketball, it's obviously a smaller team, so there is a greater change that can happen, but you're still, there's 15 guys on a basketball team, so you're probably going to have some consistency there. Year to year, these CDL teams can change kind of like all 4 of them or 2-3 of them. So like half of your team changes like in a split second. I think that really has something to do mentally as well, because it's hard to get kind of attached and feel like this loyalty with these players nearly as much. And also just the games stink. Like the games are not as fun as they used to be. Part of that is getting older and your tastes change. And like you said, like you just have maybe even more patience when you're younger for the things that bother you about your favorite video games. But then when you get older, those same things or different things, but similar kind of small level things happen, and you're like, screw this, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm gonna go take a walk. I'm gonna go play with a dog. I'd rather not play this game again. And it's unfortunate, but like that's how Call of Duty has kind of evolved or devolved based on your perspective of things. Let's talk about legacy though, because I think the aBeZy conversation of, hey, I want to retire at 30. I think that's a really good jumping off point, because when we talk about legacies, we have to talk about champs and vice versa. These things are connected so closely that it's kind of hard to even talk about how good a player is without bringing up champs. And I that's true of any sport really, but it's especially true in Call of Duty, and it's especially weird in Call of Duty. At least pre-CDL, a lot of these champs events were just randomly put in. It was not like a build-up of the entire season where you get to the end of the year and it's the playoffs essentially, and you kind of get through to the NBA Finals, the Super Bowl, the World Series, whatever kind of comparison you wanted to make. It was like if the World Series happened at the All-Star break, or if the Super Bowl happened in November. That's kind of how these things used to be, and yet champs events and champs rings have become the dominant part of the conversation when we discuss legacies. And aBeZy and Simp and Shotzzy, those are the players I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and we can have this conversation about like how do you gain, or how do you gauge like who has the most to gain? Like, would somebody going from 0 to 1 have more to gain than someone going 1 to 2? But I think with aBeZy, Simp, and Shotzi in particular, these players have 2 rings each. Winning another ring at Champs in 2025, it takes them from being these great players that everybody knows is great to, are they the greatest of all time? Those conversations start happening. I mean, I've been having those conversations with Simp, for years already, but I think it would be a lot easier to convince people. Who do you think, or I guess we should just start with these 3 players. Do you think they have the most to gain at Champs, or is it another category of players?
Well, before I answer that, I will just address kind of what you were saying, and it's kind of weird to think about it uh, in this manner. But you're talking about champs previously being this like event that didn't happen at the end of the season and whatnot. That's really like ancient history at this point, because even if you look at the play, like if you look at the active players at this champs with a ring, obviously the oldest player is going to be Slasher, and he won his in Black Ops 3,
Yeah.
and that was already an end of season event.
Mm-hmm.
So the obviously Attach would have been the one if he was uh, competing at champs this year. He would have been like the last player to win one of those champs that happened mid-season when he won an AW. So that's even just you said that, and that got me thinking that that's just something weird in itself. To we're completely essentially completely gone from that era of any active players having their rings from um, a mid-season champs as opposed to an end-of-season champs. But back to the 3 guys you mentioned there, the 2 ring guys right now, aBeZy, Simp, and Shotzi. Just in case, for whatever reason, anybody listening or watching aren't aware, Crimsix, Clayster, and Karma are the 3 players with 3 rings. They're at at the very top there. Some guys like JCap and does Crowder have 2 rings
No.
as a
Well,
coach? Okay.
as a coach, he has 1. He has 1 as a coach, 1 as a player.
Okay. So regardless, someone like JCap, for example, could enter with a coach's ring, but we're not gonna, split hairs there. The big thing really is just that those people with 2 rings, they do have that opportunity to enter, illustrious territory. And looking the list of players right now with 2 rings, the only people still actually competing are Kenny and Arcides, who won't be at champs this year. But the list of players with 2 rings, aBeZy, Aches, Apathy, Arcides, JCap, Kenny, Shotzi, and Simp. So that's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players with 2 rings. So you can already obviously make the argument that aBeZy, Simp, and Shotzi are, and we had this conversation last year, like they, regardless of exactly where you want to place them, that they're top 15 players all time, especially with the accolades there. And that's being generous. Like you can probably make the case for them to be top 10, and in some people's eyes, Simp might already be top 5, et cetera, et cetera. I think all 3 of them have a lot to gain in terms of legacy, but I do, laying it out as I just did numbers wise, like their legacies are already somewhat cemented. We'll get into it a little bit more, but the only way it gets tarnished, I'll say, for lack of a better word, is with a lack of a performance at these champs events in consecutive years. And that's something I marked down for like Atlanta. Obviously, Atlanta had a lackluster showing last year at champs, and it kind of got erased because they won EWC after that. But for champs specifically, that was kind of a shock to see Atlanta struggle last year, especially in the CDL era where they've seen so much success. And on the flip side of that, someone like Shotzi and Optic last year, they obviously come into the event following a last place finish, and people were questioning what the hell is going on with that, and then they erase any doubts by winning champs. And this year hasn't gone according to plan either. Been a lot of ups and downs and whatnot. But if Optic are to win champs this year, that just completely erases basically everything that happened this year. Shotzi gets a third ring, Dashy and Hook get a second, uh, Mercules would get a first, which is just another topic in entirely of itself. But yeah, so I mean that's just the place that champs is in terms of like rarefied air and what it means for these players' legacies in the eyes of many people. Like, you have a bad season, like, there's no way around saying it. Like, Optic have had a pretty bad season, especially in the eyes of the majority of Greenwall fans. But if they win champs here, everything that's happened before champs is irrelevant.
Yeah, so I was just looking it up. There's only been 3 players in CDL history to win back-to-back champs. No team has ever done it. So obviously, if Optic were to do it, then they make history by themselves. But they would also become the 4th, 5th, and 6th and 7th players to do it. The 3 are Karma. Karma won the first 2 champs in 2013 and 2014. JCap became the 2nd player, winning in 2015 and 2016. And then Clayster became the 3rd and most recent player, winning 2019, which was the last CWL champs, and then 2020 winning the first CDL champs. So that would obviously put them in some really like rarefied air to go back to back. And, it would kind of harken back to those days where we're talking about like where it's the mid-season tournament, because those tournaments, Denial being a good example of that, because if it had lasted till the end of the season, that team probably gets picked up by a bigger team. Like that team got poached pretty much afterward because Denial fell apart and they weren't paying their players, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm misremembering the exact Denial history because they had that later on in their history. But either way, like they get poached. They probably go to different teams. Who knows if they last until whatever it is, September, October, when they actually play champs. They were kind of like right place, right time. They were a great team, but I think it was not always going to be a long-term project for them, especially with Denial. We've seen it also, like Karma's champs are also part of that, because Impact blows up in the summer of 2013 after Anaheim, I believe. And by the end of the season, like they're not the predominant team. It's Complexity. And who knows how things could have changed, because let's say champs is at the end of that year, Clay, Krim, Aches, TP, they probably all get their ring that year as well at the end of 2013, going into Ghosts. And the end of champs and or if end of Ghosts, if champs is there, who knows how things work out then, because by that time Complexity was starting to fray as well. I believe Dido filled in for one of those events, if I'm not mistaken, when they went to EG. So I think it would be very interesting to it would show that Optic in general can like you said, erase everything that happened this season. It just doesn't matter. Like in a moment, it does not matter at all that Optic had these weird roster changes, that there was drama over Pred, getting dropped, coming back, getting dropped again, about them losing to Vegas, losing to LAG, waiting to pick up Mercules. None of this matters, like none of it. And I think that's what's so amazing. And that's why, not to put the carriage before the horse, but like I believe that Shotzi probably has the most to gain from champs, because he becomes like this incredible story of like he wins his first champs in 2020, and then 2024 they look completely out of sorts. They look like they're not even competitive going into champs, and then they win it in front of their home crowd, which was kind of an amazing like experience in the arena. And then 2025, to have this horrible season as a team, you have to actually perform well at the final major to ensure that you're actually going to even get to champs, and then to win champs again. You become the the only player in Optic history to win champs with them twice, because obviously before this it was only the dynasty team had champs. Well, I guess everybody on this team, or not everybody,
Dashy.
yeah, Dashy would have back to back, but Shotzi would also have the 2020 ring, which he was the season MVP of the 2020 season. There's just a lot on the line for him. It would, as an aside, it would definitely shut up Aches for good. Like I don't think Stephen Aches could really do anything at that point. To talk about somebody actually has more rings than him, that would have I think he'd be the fourth player in CDL history in general to have 3 rings. So it would be pretty much a groundbreaking, monumental performance for Shotzi if he were to win champs again.
I will say I think there's somebody else, and specifically in my mind, who has the most to gain, and in theory I guess has something to lose too. But of the players that we just listed here with 2 rings, I will say I think Shotzi does have the most to gain, because it does feel like, Simp and aBeZy, their legacies are pretty cemented right now, that they, in a lot of people's minds, they would take a massive fall off for them to not be considered both top 10 players of all time in COD history. I feel like Shotzi is still, for whatever reason, some people could argue that's not the case for him. So a 3rd ring would, it would be undeniable at that point.
Who do you think has more to gain in general? If Shotzi doesn't, in your mind, is there a specific player that you think does have more to gain if he were to win champs this year?
I think it's Scrap. I think especially just the way LAT have looked of recent, and the bigger thing looming in the background for Scrap is that they, with Toronto and NYSL at Champs 2023, his Toronto team won the winners finals against New York, and then they get to the grand finals against New York and they don't win a map. It's kind of, a little similar in just in terms of the Vancouver teams this year, where they get to these finals and they haven't won a map. Obviously it's 4 maps there. So it's a little different, and the narrative and everything isn't the same. But I think Scrap, like, especially we've had the conversation around season MVP for this year. If he gets the season MVP, he's got the regular season tournament MVPs and tournament titles. Those are starting to rack up for him. But the one that's missing is champs, and obviously it's still a young career for him, so he has time. But I do think he, like, it could enter the conversation for potentially the greatest season an individual has ever had, at least in the CDL era. If he wins champs, if he gets, he's got 2 titles, 2 tournament MVPs. If he gets regular season MVP and then wins champs on top of that, that's potentially one of the greatest seasons in competitive Call of Duty history. Even further, or less to that degree, definitely would be one of the greatest seasons in CDL history. So I think he has a lot to gain, especially in that regard. And I do think, playing devil's advocate to that too, kind of similar to the FaZe guys, like, I guess it's really, you can say this for a lot of people, but like, especially the FaZe and Atlanta guys, or sorry, I said FaZe and Atlanta, FaZe and LAT guys who have had that success this year. Like, if they don't show up at champs, that is just another conversation in itself. So I do think Scrap, though, especially of those players, and I did write it down. So there's the 3 players that we already mentioned, aBeZy, Simp, and Shotzi. They got the 2 rings. And then there are 7 players with 1 ring: Hydra, Envoy, Celium, Draza, Dashy, Hook, and Slasher, which means with 8 teams, 32 players at champs, there's 22 players, and which is roughly 69% of the players at champs who don't have a ring. And I think of those 22 players, Scrap is the one who has the most to gain, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that one of the last things that you said about like not only does he, in your opinion, have the most to gain, he has among the most to lose at this event. If he doesn't show up or if the team doesn't have the success, because I think it's very hard to believe that he's not going to have a good event. Like he's
Yeah.
one of the best players, if not the best player in the world. And I just can't see that happening. Like there might be one series that he doesn't have a great performance in, but I think in general he's going to do well. But like, let's say they don't win champs, even if they get second, then it starts to happen again where it's like, well, Silver Surfer, like you can't really win the big one. And it's something that a lot of great players have dealt with. Scump went a while without winning champs, and he was by far the best or one of the best players for 3, 4, 5 years at that point. And then they finally win in IW. I think an underrated one is Octane, because Octane was always said to be one of the most talented players, probably the best AR or second best AR, depending on where you ranked him in formal. And this was years and years and years. And he didn't end up winning until 2022 with LAT, which was near the end of his career. Dashi is another one where he even said it like that he felt he was more talented than players that were beating him in these events. And he finally wins one last season with Optic. But again, that conversation had really started to grow with Dashi, was that he's a selfish player. He just plays for stats, that he's not a winning player. And I don't think the same conversation will be had about Scrap, regardless of the results at these champs. But if you don't win it now, you only have your next chance a year from now, which is a long time. Like 12 months is a really long time to have to wait to try to win champs again. And I think it could be a pretty big blow to Scrap, and especially with him most likely going to be named MVP of the league, to not win it that year is always kind of a blow, I think, to a lot of those players. I don't know exactly how often that has happened, because Shotzi ended up winning in 2020. Simp won in 2021. I think Hydra, did he not win in, I think it was 2023 though. LAT, I know one of them did not win season MVP when they won it. So that was probably the difference. But a lot of times we've seen the season MVP go on to win champs. And I think it does linger with that player at least a little bit when they're not able to pull it off at the end of the season, despite having the individual accolade to go with it. But another part of this that I think is interesting is FaZe, because LAT and FaZe, they are the teams that we both expect. If one of them doesn't win champs, we expect the other to win. If Atlanta doesn't win champs, it's really bad. Like they should not go on Twitter for several months if they don't win champs, because they have the Silver Surfer tagline basically tattooed on them. It seems like permanently, because they won 2 events this year. They won EWC last year. I think they even won a major last year. They've beaten LAT once in a grand finals. They've lost to them once. And yet people still doubt Atlanta and say, well, they get second a lot. They don't win a lot, or they get close to it, but they're not able to come up with a win at the end of the day. If they don't win this year, I think those players have quite a bit to lose as well. I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, not even like Silver Surfer in that regard, at least specifically for champs. Like they literally got top 6 at champs last year, and that's what I kind of mentioned. Like if something happens again, that harkens back a little to our power rankings, where I forget how exactly I worded it, but it was like anything but championship Sunday, or I wanted to do anything but grand finals, but then I didn't, because like I didn't know if like those 2 teams would match up, whatever. But yeah, like if FaZe has another, catastrophic performance at Champs, and in that regard, I think it's anything but making Championship Sunday. That gets the wheels turning a little bit in regards to what the future of this team looks like. And I think it's fair to bring up again, like, really, that conversation happened last year. Well, we don't know if it happened actually with the team or behind closed doors, but at least from a community perspective, people were starting to wonder if this FaZe roster was going to stick. And then EWC happens and they win, and that kind of, at least from the outside looking in, seems to be like, okay, we're going to ride this out. And I guess even early this year when the struggles were happening online, we mentioned, like, again, nothing concrete coming from behind closed doors or anything, but like the wheels could start to get turning in regards to, do we have to have these conversations of potentially making a roster change? So that is, it is interesting to see. It will be interesting to see how this tournament affects FaZe. I do, in all regards, expect FaZe to not repeat last year's showing at Champs, and I do think they should be in a good position to make a good run. They do have a pretty tough first round matchup on paper and Optic, but end of the day, it's only an 18 tournament, so that there really aren't many what you would consider a free win. Some people might argue against that in regards to Carolina's recent form, or I guess maybe even Boston in some regard, but FaZe has played well against Optic this year, but it's still, end of the day, it's Champs and anything can happen. And I think, that we saw the quote unquote anything can happen. We saw that last year with FaZe at Champs, because I don't think anybody was expecting FaZe to have a top 6 finish at Champs last year. So it is, I guess, to round it out too, like, you kind of mentioned the whole dynamic there of like players playing for stats or whatever, and you're referring to potentially the narrative around Dashy or whatnot. I feel like even though he has seen the success, I feel like there are still some people who question Celium's play style and the impact it has for the team. I disagree with that sentiment very wholeheartedly. I think, that just at least the FaZe trio of Simp, Celium, and aBeZy, they know how to work well together. And if it feels like, Celium is playing for stats, then that might be your take, but at the end of the day, it does work. And I think even beyond that, it works importantly in search, which at the end of the day, stats don't matter in search, but you have the aBeZy player running in head first, being that, looking for first bloods, that sort of player. You got Simp following him up behind with SMG, but you need that sort of statue AR player to be that like backline guy if you have those tiny terrors running in ahead of you. So I think even beyond like just looking at it from a stat base, like the play styles, they know they have the chemistry, they know how to work well together. So I disagree with, even if there is like an actual conversation around that in regard to Celium. But I do think from a very, basic standpoint, like Celium and Draza, like them being the guys with 1 ring as opposed to Simp and aBeZy with 2, it is an interesting conversation, because I feel like, at least in regards to Atlanta, if things don't go well at the end of this year, there's always, when it's been the roster changes for this team, it's been the trio sticking in just a 1-person change. But how long can they continue to make that the decision? Like, when do they move beyond a 1-person change if they feel like they need to make a change? So I think that's a little premature, but kind of ranted a little bit there. It is interesting though, just to see like that's what's on the line at Champs from a very like basic standpoint. Like, you can win champs and everything's fine and dandy, or you have a lackluster showing, and then all of these questions can happen for all of these teams. I think even, a team like LAT, like if they struggle at champs, I think contractually they're stuck, because I believe Nate Schott said like we don't have to worry about anything contract wise until 2027. I believe there was a clip I saw something like that. So like outside of that, like outside of contracts being the thing keeping teams together, like a lackluster champs showing can have as big of an impact on your future as actually hoisting the trophy at the end of the day.
Yeah, what you said about Salim is right on. Like, we're not the podcast to ask, because we both think he's one of the best COD players of his generation. Certainly, currently, I think we both said he was the runner up for MVP this season. So that kind of shows, and he's been like in the top 3 or top 5 MVP conversation basically since the CDL started. Like, he wasn't basically the last 3 or 4 years that has been where he's lingered around for MVP. Another player I think in the same vein as Salim is Hydra, where going from 1 to 2 is really, really important for these players. Like, I saw a tweet, and it was about a similar conversation. It was about Hydra specifically, and it made me mad when I read it. But I think it could be an interesting conversation in general, because it kind of is related to what we're talking about here. But the tweet was, Hydra is closer to being the CDL GOAT than Simp, Shotzzy, Kenny, etc. 5 major wins across 3 different teams and 2 different orgs is insane. And this was a quote tweet to Breaking Point. They put out the CDL major wins by team, and FaZe had 7, Thieves 4, NYSL 3, Ultra 3, Optic 2, Minnesota Surge, and LAG all have 1 each. And of course, if you're looking at NYSL, then Hydra has all 3 of those major wins. And then he has 2 of those for LAT as well, because of the 2 this year. So he has 5 major titles, which I think this person was just saying that he has 5. FaZe over an entire the CDL has 7. It's not including the home series, I believe, in 2020. I could be mistaken on that, but I believe that this is just when majors were introduced, and then plus champs, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it's just majors, but either way, the conversation is like, is Hydra closer to the CDL GOAT than Simp, Shotzzy, Kenny, etc.? He is not closer than Simp. I would say he's not closer than Shotzzy. I think he's better than Kenny, but I would not put him above Kenny in an all-time list. If he were to get to 2, though, right, that's kind of like where I'm going with this. If he gets 2 rings, Simp has 2 rings, Shotzzy has 2 rings, Kenny has 2 rings. Hydra would have a season MVP in 2023. He would have another probably top 3 finish in MVP voting this season. He has potentially, he could get champs MVP, because that's always open, and 2 rings on top of that. He's definitely in the top 10 probably at that point. I think it's one of those deals, and I don't know where you sit on this matter of like, the talent is better than the resume, even if the resume is really, really good. And that's how I felt about Simp for a really long time. Like, his resume is great. Like, if you're just going by the resume, he has like a top 10, like you said, at worst top 15 resume. But then you look at the skill, and you look at like how good he actually is, and you're like, oh, he's actually like probably one of the most talented players to ever play Call of Duty. And I think Hydra has that kind of potential. It's not like, that's not a groundbreaking declaration, because we've been talking about this kid since even before he came to America. So what do you think about this whole Hydra, and to link it back to Celium, like if Celium were to get 2, and with the accolades and the skill that we know he has, where does that kind of put them?
I do think Hydra's an interesting one if he does get to 2 rings. I kind of have the similar mindset of you. Like, he seems like a player that even if he doesn't get that second ring this year or ever, like, he's always going to be remembered just for how incredibly talented he was regardless, and that's going to be something that that probably, again, if he doesn't get that second ring, like, that probably helps him on some all-time lists just because of how insane he is, for lack of a better term. I do think it is important to remember, though, that, like, at a bare minimum, as it stands right now, he's the only EU player with a ring. So, like, I think it's not even close to say that he's the greatest European Call of Duty player of all time.
No offense to Bance, like, and
That's
he
what,
he
yeah.
held the mantle after Tommy,
Yep.
and Swanee, I think, had like the highest potential for a long time, but like, I don't know how many event wins Bance has in his career. I would wager to say that Hydra probably has more already, at least at the major level, not like
Yeah.
in total,
Yeah.
but like, but yeah, like Hydra has 5 major wins. He has champs. Like, he's undoubtedly the best European player, and he's by far the most talented.
So I think, and that could very much change. The landscape in the CDL is changing. We have these, the Miami team with all Spanish roster. We have potentially some more European or French talent coming in with gentlemates over the years. So, like, that conversation could change if Hydra's career literally ended. But I think we're both of the mind that Hydra's only going to continue to rack up the accolades and tournament titles and whatnot. So it seems like, at a bare minimum, he has set the floor for his career as greatest European player of all time. It's just stacking on top of that. And then how does he, fit into the, all-time Call of Duty list for all players in the world? It could be the recency bias here speaking, but if LAT win this event, I do think there would be some people who would potentially put Hydra above aBeZy in an all-time list. I don't think I would agree with that, and I do think that would be greatly impacted by the recency bias, but it would be a three-peat and 3 straight events. They would both have 2 rings. So we can revisit that after champs, but I wouldn't put Hydra above Simp just yet. I do think that that's taking it a bit far in the context of the tweet you mentioned. But I mean, again, end of the day, that just shows just how much this champ stuff means and how big of an impact it truly can have. In regards to Celium, I would probably have to think a little harder, but I do know, like, some of these players that, at least in the 2 ring category, like Aches, I love Aches. I love, what he meant for the Call of Duty community and everything like that. Arcity's JCap, I guess you would count Kenny as an AR for his 2 rings, but like, those are the AR players with 2 rings. I think most people would probably say Celium is the most talented AR player out of those guys. I think some old heads might argue like prime JCap, and that's like, BO1 JCap basically, or even before he was winning the rings. But I think that could it'd be at least a conversation, whether you agree or not. And I don't even know if I agree, but it's something that would be talked about, at least in regards to Celium if he does get a second ring. But at the same time, then, if Celium gets a second ring, Draza's getting a second ring. So then where does Draza fit into that conversation too? Very interesting topics there. This is the fun of this legacy talk. And these are things I wasn't even thinking about really talking heading into this show, and we're already talking about it. And, that's just the fun of it.
Let's just clean up the one ring conversation real quick, because we've already talked about Hydra, we've talked about Celium, we've talked a little bit about Dashy, but like Envoy, Draza, Dashy, Hook, Slasher, these are players that also have one ring going into this event. I think we both think it is a uber long shot that Slasher gets number 2 here. But
Hey, I think people thought it was an uber long shot. Eights would get number 2 at World War II
yeah,
champs too. So
but if he were to get that, then like you just listed off the best ARs or some of the best ARs in COD history, obviously not including Octane and Formal because they each have 1. But if Slasher would get 2, then we're having different conversations. We're also having a lot different conversation in general because this would be the most unpredictable champs winner of all time, even far surpassing Optic last year or I don't denial. No, denial was really good going into that champs, but I don't know who else would even qualify at that
it
point.
would be EG World War II.
Yeah, and EG was also kind of like ramping it up at the end. Like people said, like no, they're going to be really good. In the practices leading up to champs. So this would be a pretty incredible turnaround. I don't see it happening. I don't think you do either. It is interesting to think about Hook, Dashy, Draza, and Envoy, though. Envoy is going to get about as little credit as one could probably get, probably along with Draza in this case, if he were to win his second ring. Dashy would get, a lot of credit, I would imagine, because he's definitely going to drop numbers and like he's one of the more talented AR players. He's another player that would be in that conversation of like, is he the best AR player of all time if he gets his second ring? Hook, his legacy completely changes, I think.
I was just gonna, yeah.
Like his career is weird. Like if you look at his team history, like to win the first CDL champs and then the stuff that happened the next 2 or so years, he's kind of in the wilderness. He started this season in challengers. He gets benched, brought back, or he got released, I think, outright. He gets released by Optic for a guy that he replaced in the first place and then replaces him again. If he were to win champs, where does that kind of put Hook in all this conversation? Nade Shot tweet notwithstanding, where he said that Hook was like one of the most talented players of all time.
You stole exactly what I was gonna say. That was literally what I was like. Hook wins his second ring, and he like completely changes the narrative around his entire career. And I do think, it's different depending on what era of COD fandom you're in. For people like us, like saying something like Hook could be considered one of the greatest of all time, that feels like a foregone conclusion. Like if you were to tell me that 10 years ago, I'm like, yeah, this kid's freaking nasty. Like obviously that's where he's going to end up, but he's obviously dealt with a lot, gone through a lot, and it hasn't all gone according to plan. If he does get that second ring, that's what I was thinking as you were talking, is the Nade Shot tweet of like, Hook is paraphrasing here, but it was along the lines of like, Hook is a player that doesn't come around very often, and if you get the chance to acquire him, you don't pass that up. Essentially, what it was. And he he gets that second ring. He solidifies that conversation, and that's where his name. I already think, even if he doesn't get a second ring ever in COD, like he's already considered one of the best Call of Duty, one of the best FPS players of all time, just because he did have that success in Halo as well. Obviously, if you're gonna have that conversation, like Formal's number 1 far and away, but then like Hook is at least mentioned in that regard. Same with Shotzzy, because of Shotzi's success in both. But like Hook he might not be at the very top of that list, but he's at least mentioned, and I think that only is solidified further with a second ring. I think it's it's going to be tough for Optic, but stranger things have happened, and I think if Optic did win champs this year, I would be most happy for Hook, especially you laid it out perfectly. Like dude was literally in challengers to start this year, potentially not even on a CDL team. And then he's gone through a lot even this year in terms of getting picked up by Optic, when it felt like before that he was dominating challengers and it was going to be a question of what team does he get a chance on. It felt like it might be a bottom of the barrel team. And then he was going to go through the cycle of like, potentially struggling on that team and having to deal with all that, yada, yada. gets the Optic chance, dropped by Optic, gets picked back up. Like, it's been a roller coaster. And I would be really happy for him if Optic were able to get the job done.
All right, so we're nearing about an hour and a half in. I want to wrap this up, but is there
Yeah.
anybody else that you think is of notable or honorable mention to either have a ton to gain or a ton to lose at Champs 2025?
I think we kind of glossed over it just because you just mentioned it, but Envoy is an interesting one just because, like you said, like I feel like um, if they do get the job done here, it would be like he would almost be like an afterthought, it feels
Yeah.
like, and he would be someone who has 2 rings. So that is an interesting conversation there. I do think Slasher, you mentioned it in general. I think the bigger thing um, with him, regardless of exactly how Carolina plays at this event, is just a question of, is this the last time we ever see Slasher compete? Um, the likely answer is no, just because I think even if Carolina struggle at champs, they'll at least have that roster at EWC. But they did make a change last year at the end of the year when Beans played at EWC. So it's not out of the question that this could potentially be Slasher's last event. If it's not, it could be his second to last event. I hope it's not. I think he seems to be the guy. He's got his robotics degree and whatever. He seemingly knows what he's gonna do after life in competitive COD ends, and I think he's gonna want to extend his career as long as he can. And I still think he's a pretty solid player. So I just think that's is this the last hurrah for Slasher is just a question in general, regardless of the placing at champs. And yeah, I don't think there's really anybody else outside of these guys that we mentioned. It is, 22 players don't have a ring. I think the one of the 22 there is Scrap already uh, labeled that and outlined all that. 4 of the 8 teams at champs, Boston, Miami, Vancouver, and Toronto, don't have any champs winners. So if one of those teams somehow pulled something off at champs, we would get 4 completely new uh, ring bearers in COD esports. And I do think of that list, Vancouver is very interesting. Just kind of, what I mentioned earlier there when we were talking about the lack of marketing or whatever, I guess brings us a little full circle. Is just like we don't know what to expect from Vancouver because it's been so long since we last saw them in action. And if Vancouver does get like a last place finish at champs here, does that like completely invalidate everything they did earlier this year with the magical run they went on after getting Neptune in the squad? So I do think that's an interesting conversation. I guess to the same degree, something else to keep in mind, the quote unquote home court advantage, or home field cheese, however you want to phrase it. Event's not technically in Toronto, but it's a home event for Toronto Ultra in most people's eyes. Is that something here where Toronto gets the job done in Canada, similar to Optic getting the champs win in Texas last year? I guess that's something else to keep an eye on too.
Yeah, and then we can complain about it after the fact because that happened. I think Miami would be very interesting if they were to win. Of course, it just any of these teams winning is interesting in its own right, but if an all-European team were to win champs, and this specific all-European team, which did not really seem to have a lot of life during like the Major 2 qualifiers at Major 2, it just felt like they kind of ran their course. We thought super highly of Real, still do. Super has been a revelation this season. Rincourt, we've talked about it, probably going to win Rookie of the Year, or definitely going to be one of the finalists, the top 2 or top 3. But again, like going back to the all-European thing, like they would be on the very short list of EU players to win champs, and then to do it together, to do it as an all-Spanish team, it's pretty, like, it'd be a pretty ridiculous outcome. I don't see it happening. Again, we've talked about like how likely we think some of these champs winners are. They're in the we have no clue what they're gonna do, but I think of the somewhat, I guess, realistic champs. Like I wouldn't say it's likely or anything, but somewhat realistic. They'd have like among the craziest champs win. Anything else before we get out of here?
Real quick, Breaking Point just tweeted this 12 minutes ago. It's one of those blue pill versus red pill things. This is one that I think the community's gonna go crazy over because it's literally they posted it at 4:30, so 13 minutes ago. So hasn't really kicked in yet, but it says the choice is yours, and the blue pill is John, Scump, Zuma, and Apathy. The red pill is Simp, Shotzi, Hydra, and aBeZy. Which one you picking? Gut reaction, go.
I mean, it's the red pill, but yeah.
Dude, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's crazy.
I feel like they just put Scump on that team and Scump and Zuma just for the interactions.
But they did they like that? I mean, that's kind of like I think it's we're not going to spend too much time talking about it now, but like that's the eras like that. That's really like four of the best SMGs from pre CDL era, four of the best SMGs in the CDL era, and not even looking at numbers or anything. I think it's red pill right away, and that's kind of crazy and a little scary.
The speed that the red pill would be moving at is that's insane. But yeah, that I mean, I've always thought like I'm one of those people that believes that the players get better and better over time. Like, I think there are valid arguments for the players that came up during like the original MW2 or like COD 4 that they were very talented players, but like obviously like Call of Duty has evolved and the current players, the best of the best, are kind of superhuman, even comparison to the very best players of a different era. And I think that kind of proves it. Like Scump, I think is like one of those players where he could slot in on either team and people will be kind of fine with the outcome. Zuma and like in John and Apathy, they all had these very high peaks. And I was also thinking when you were talking about Envoy, like how he would win 2 champs and like he would be kind of a footnote. Apathy is kind of the blueprint of that. Like Apathy has had 2 rings for years and years now, and he's just never really gotten the same level of respect, in terms of like that the 2 ring club. But I just figured I'd mention that before we get out of here.
Yeah.
But that does it for today's show. Obviously, a little bit longer of one, and this is just a fun topic. Obviously, we probably will break it down a little bit after the fact of like whose legacies did change considerably at champs. I think somebody's is like that's just how these things go. There's only been, I believe, 12 champs. I think this might be the 12th because it's 20. We don't count COD XP. We've never counted COD XP. So 2013 is the first champs. It's 2025. That's 12 or 13, I think. And obviously this is the 6th CDL champs, if I'm not mistaken. 21, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. 6 CDL champs. And there haven't been that many like multi-time winners. Like you listed it off, and there's a dozen or something around there for multi-time champions. There's a good chance that we're gonna have a first-time winner at champs this year, unless FaZe wins, which would be pretty interesting. I don't think we covered that aspect of it, that they would be kind of.
I'd argue this is as good of a chance that we have the first repeat, at least from an organization standpoint, in the CDL era, because FaZe, Optic, or Thieves win, like that those are your repeats there for an organization standpoint. Obviously, Dallas Empire and NYSL can't win again, but other teams they got a good shot.
Yep. And we will be back, I believe, we're going to do a live show Sunday. We might do it before then, but the podcast will be going up on Monday, and that will be our champs preview. It'll probably be a little bit of a longer episode, I would imagine, too. But we're going to try to break down the tournament from all angles, and we're doing it. Usually we do the champs preview or the event preview midweek, but because champs starts, I believe, on Thursday, if we do the show on Wednesday and it goes up on Thursday morning, we don't think that people really have enough time to listen to it, to kind of digest it. It'll just be like right from preview into the actual game. So we believe that if we do it over the weekend and it goes out on Monday, that you actually have a few days to listen to it or watch it if that's your thing. But that's the plan right now. We'll be back sometime this weekend, and the podcast will be up on Monday morning. Please like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feeds wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music. We're also on YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Search up Ego Chall Podcast to do so. We've had daily videos for the last few weeks on the channel, and trying to do that as long as we can. I think once we get to the off season, it's going to suck. It's going to be very, very difficult to do that. But as long as we can, I'd like to try to do the daily videos. So please subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you could. Follow us on Twitter at jbank with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter's at Ego Chall Podcast. You can watch the live streams on YouTube. You can watch the live streams at twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbank with 2Ks. And like I said, the next show will be sometime this weekend. And then we'll be back to talk about champs after that. But that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys as always for all the support. We really appreciate it. And yeah, I had fun talking today. Even, we're saying the champs preview is going to be a bit of a longer episode, but today's was a bit of a longer one too. And that's just, we're in champ season, and that's the gravity of this. And there was even, we had some good topics today, I feel like, and there's even some stuff that I wasn't even thinking about that just came up during the show itself. So I had fun with it. Hope you guys had fun listening, watching along. If you guys got any thoughts in the comments or anything like that you want us to potentially address in the champs preview show, comment in the YouTube videos or anything like that. And even there was somebody in one of the breakout videos who commented on our all-star picks, and somebody said like Shotzi should be an all-star, they think, and I replied to it saying like let me know how and why, and we can have that conversation in the comments too. And if it's a good combo, we can bring it over to the podcast itself. So if you guys are thinking anything ahead of champs, let us know. We may be tied into the show too. But other than that, yeah, champs is quickly coming up, even though it feels like it's been a while. And we'll be here to break it all down for you. I'm really excited for the preview show too. Should be some good stuff to talk about there. But yeah, until then, we'll see you guys when we do go live again. And remember to send the chow.